Ciao a tutti, it's Aram, and today we finally have the rulings video for hot format. First off, what is hot format? Hot format is played under the NAWCQ rules, ban list, and card pool, which means it uses North American rulings of the time, which is very relevant for this video. The ban list is the April 2014 ban list, and the last set that is legal is the Realm of Light structure deck. There is a variation of hat that has a bit more stuff, but that's not what is played online. So yeah, I don't know what your locals, what you play. Maybe you go for Master Rule 3, July ban list, and the first Arc V starter decks, and maybe you use European rulings. I don't know, but for online play, this is the standard pretty much. Now, why North American rulings is important is trigger locations. What are trigger locations? It's because in North America we use the same ruling as we use in Modern, where pretty much like if let's say Chenex Undyne sends Dragoons to the graveyard as cost, you can chain TD Crow to that and banish the Dragoons, and now because at the end of the chain Dragoons is no longer in the graveyard, it cannot activate. Under European rulings, you can activate Dragoons under with this circumstance. Another example of this ruling changing stuff up is like if you blind MST into Call of the Haunted, and the opponent can chain Call of the Haunted and summon back the Moral Attack. Now these guys get popped, but under European rulings, Moral Attacks still triggers and gets a pop. Under North American ruling, it does not. So yeah, this does nerf Mermel significantly. Doesn't stop them from being the best deck, but they would be a lot stronger without it. But speaking of big nerfs to Mermels, we have the fact that both in North America and in Europe, but not in the OCG, we play under old simultaneous effects go on chain rulings, or SEGOC, which means if you play Modern, let's say for example, I play Track Brigades, I know that. If I activate Revolt and I have a bunch of effects that go off at the same time, I can choose to use Shurek first, then Kit, then Nerval, or whatever order I want, really, as long as we respect the two tiers of mandatory and optional. But in hot format, the first card in a chain that reaches its trigger location has to activate first. What does this mean? The main example is Teus and Marksman. If we played by Modern rulings, you could discard Marksman to special summon Teus, and then you could go Chilling Quank Teus and Chilling to Marksman, which would be pretty fucking busted, because this lets you not only make hands mistiming, but it also lets you dodge Traptrix Triple Nightmare of Teus. Because we play under old simultaneous effects on chain rules, you are forced to go first Marksman, Chilling one Marksman, and Chilling to Abyssteus, because both are mandatory, and Teus hits the graveyard before... Marksman hits the graveyard before Teus gets special summoned. So yeah, keep that in mind. Also, Teus is mandatory because of an errata. We'll talk more about erratas later. But yeah. Another very important ruling is about leaving the field effects versus Compulse. The main example of leaving the field effect is Gear Gigantex. It's not absolute zero like in Edison, but yeah, if it gets compulsed or play this, does it trigger? Does it not trigger? The answer is it triggers. You get to special summon back the Giuliano from grave. So that's pretty relevant. The best way to answer Gear Gigantex will be Blackhorn or Solemn, because it doesn't hit the field because the summon is negated. Or another great way to get rid of Gigantex is Traprix Trapple Nightmare, because it negates the effect and then destroys it in Chain Link 2, which is very strong because Gigantex misses the timing on the floating effect. So yeah. Now, we spoke about Abyssteus being mandatory. Yeah, that's an errata. Nowadays it's not mandatory anymore, but it was so very relevant for Chain Link stuff. Next we have Necrovalley, which is the nightmare of every Time Wizard judge out there. But yeah, in hard format it has one of the worst iterations of it. Basically it doesn't stop cards from moving themselves out of the graveyard. So yeah, it doesn't stop artifacts, for example, or Dragon Rulers if you banish stuff from the hand, but I guess that's enough of a hit, I guess. Next we have Forbidden Lance, Forbidden Chalice, I think Forbidden Just 2, and Effect Vader. All of these cards in hard format last until the end phase. Nowadays they last until the end of the turn. What's the difference? You have to deactivate them at some point in the end phase, which means that like Bujingi Yamato is pretty much immune to Valor, because the way the end phase works is the turn player, if he has mandatory effects he has to use them. If not, Yamato is not. Or another example is Kuri Bandit. They pass the chain of priority to the opponent. The opponent now has a mandatory effect, that is to remove the effect of these cards. And after he does so, the chain of priority goes back to the turn player. Unless he has something else he can play that before the mandatory effect. So yeah. The way this works for... so basically, Valor is useless versus these cards. Chalice is good if you chain it to Yamato's effect activation, but not if you use it before. But I guess you could use it for some nifty battle tricks and still get the effects in the end phase. And Lance, you can enter end phase, use Yamato's effect, and then make Lance stop applying, and then pass the priority to the opponent. So yeah. Another point in Valor's non-favor, I guess. For some more minor erratas, we have Ryko. It targets in hard format. Nowadays it doesn't target anymore. We have cards like Grandsoil, Gilasaurus, Grandsoil, Dweloren, and Red Darkness Metal Dragon that don't have a hard once per turn in that format like they do nowadays. You have Gilasaurus that targets the monster in graveyard that will be summoned. Nowadays it doesn't. We have Spiritualism, which is kind of relevant. I don't have Spiritualism. Basically, if you've seen the World's profile of Sehabi and Cory, they played Kargogon to get over Spiritualism because Worlds was played under OCG rules, and under OCG rules, Spiritualism targets. However, under TCG rules, because it was unclear, it was ruled that it did not target, so it's a lot stronger in the format. Last errata would be Bujingi Turtle. In hard format, it can be used in damage step. Later on, it got errata to clarify that it can't. And that is because in hard format, for some reason, monster effects that negate monster effect activation can be used in damage step. Or, sorry, cards that negate the effect, not the activation. And that have to be chained to the card. They can be used in damage step, which is super relevant to stop the hands and Abyssteus. This is why Skull Meister is so popular in Evil Swarms, because it negates the hands, which DD Crow cannot do. Next up, we have a North American exclusive. In the rest of the world, it was ruled that Abyssteus destroying itself is a maintenance cost. In North America, it's an effect, which means trap stun. Basically, if you trap stun the Abyssteus, it stays. And Abyssteus has a nifty little line of text that nobody reads, that the player that has Abyssteus face up on the field cannot use any spell cards. And lucky for Mermal, they don't play a lot of spell cards. Unlucky for Mermal, Soul Charge is a spell card, so yeah. that's some very nasty shit you can do to Mermals. Now we have a couple of miscellaneous rulings that I thought would be good to mention. Artifacts in the back rows are counted as back rows and not as monsters, so they don't get banished off Dimensional Fissure. Fiendish Chain, if it gets trap stunned, once the turn is over, Fiendish resumes its effect. If you blind MST into Ignition, you cannot skip both battle phase skips in the same turn by using Soul Charge, because Soul Charge prevents you from entering a battle phase, because you cannot go into the battle phase the turn you use it. Meanwhile, Ignition skips you to the end phase as soon as you enter the battle phase, because it skips the next battle phase. So you have to do them into different turns. Mequip Tangerine Engineer doesn't... Sorry, I meant Soul of Silvermountain. I don't know why I keep fucking messing these two cards up. Always. Anyways, if Soul of Silvermountain gets negated, gets its effect negated, the card it locked down can be activated. It's not like Shangri-La. Up until this point, I've asked 3 different judges, and no one seems to have an answer to what happens in case the card that was targeted remains on the field after Silvermountain regains its effects. Nobody knows. I really wanted to include that ruling in the video, but seriously, nobody knows. I don't know, it's bound to come up in before the hit death of the universe. So, I would have liked to know that, but hey, if that happens to you, call me. I want to see it. But yeah, that's it for me. Leave a like, subscribe, join the Discord, and for fuck's sake, don't use Blackhorn on Sanctum or Teus or Moral Attack. You cannot do that. Blackhorn only stops inherent summons. By inherent summons, we mean like XYZ summons, synchro summons, special summons like Cyber Dragon that just special summons itself, doesn't start a chain. For fuck's